If an Indian student or politician were charged with sedition or some other alleged act of anti-nationalism, arrested and jailed, would you be willing to take on the case, or would you shy away from locking horns with Prime Minister Modi and his government?
So does he always start with the easy questions, or just for me? Well, I know you're talking about a completely hypothetical situation that is not at all relevant to what's happening here, right? Does it look like from my previous cases I shy away from controversy? I don't think so.
So journalists who think that they're in danger can knock on your door for help just before the knock comes on their door?
I do represent political prisoners in a lot of the cases. It's not always journalists, it can be opposition figures, but whenever the state becomes a tool of repression and whenever the judiciary becomes a tool of repression, I think people do need help sometimes externally. And in some of the cases I've worked on, like in Egypt, I work alongside local council, but one of my messages to them is, I don't live there, you do, so there might be things that you can't do and you can't say that I can, and let me help with that. I do try and help in situations like that where the local remedy is not enough.
I want to question you a little about the Nasheed case, and then I want to question you a bit more about Julian Assange after that. Now, twice you said that President Nasheed is out of harm's way, and it made me ask the question, and I'll ask you this as his lawyer, does he intend to fulfill the commitment he gave the Maldivian government to return after his sick leave ends? Initially, he was granted 30 days. I know he's applied for 60 more, but I don't know whether that's been given or not.
Right.
But whenever that sick leave ends, whether it's 30, 60, or 90, will he go back? Because when he does, he'll be back in harm's way.
Right. I mean, what happened was the government provided a doctor while he was in prison in the Maldives. The doctor said he needs surgery on his back, and they allowed him to travel to London to undergo this medical treatment. He is now in London. He saw a doctor, and on the basis of the advice that he was given, he asked for an extra 60 days. The government has not, or the prison service, I should say, more specifically, has not responded to that request so far. So he's still there. He's waiting for a response from the government. What he really wants is to go back to his country, but not to go back to a prison cell, to go back under circumstances that are conducive to have him be involved in political life. And your own Foreign Secretary Jaishankar, was part of a Commonwealth delegation that recently went to the Maldives, and they listed a series of recommendations as to what should happen next. And one of them was a very strongly worded recommendation saying political prisoners should be freed, and those who are outside the country should be allowed to return, and they should be allowed to fully participate in the next presidential elections, which are in 2018. The real tragedy of what's happened in that country is that it went from dictatorship to democracy, and then it slid back to dictatorship. And I think for those 4 years, you had this great example in the Indian Ocean region of a moderate Muslim nation which had moved into being a democracy, which was actually leading the climate justice movement, was working towards reforming the judiciary and all those things that are really important. And now you have on your doorstep a country that has become the top recruiting ground for ISIS in the world on a per capita basis, which I think is shocking, and I think something that should concern all of us.
But I'll come back to my question, and I'll tell you why I'm coming back to it, because you know this better than me, that there was a certain amount of controversy created, both in Britain and, more importantly, in the Maldives, when President Nasheed arrived in London. People said he'd gone to 10 Downing Street before he'd gone to meet a doctor. And they wondered, was he really ill, or was this a political escape? Which is why I asked that question.
Right. Well, as I said, it was the government's own doctors that said he needed treatment, and he did. But, we were invited to attend Downing Street by Prime Minister Cameron on a Saturday, and we, of course, accepted.
The Urban Development Minister, a gentleman called Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, who says that slogans that call for Azadi, that is freedom in Kashmir, slogans that call for the destruction or the breakup of India are anti-national, even if those slogans fall well short of inciting violence. How do you respond to a minister who has such strong views?
You have a judiciary that has come out with some judgments, as I understand it, that have tried to narrow the scope of crimes like sedition to make sure there is some kind of link to an incitement to violence. But, Scottish people called for the secession of Scotland from the UK, and I don't think we should go around arresting them all.
And the Parti Kubaca in Canada, and the Catalans in Spain.
Yeah, and separatists in Turkey as well, and some of those cases have gone before the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights has drawn a similar line to the one I'm advocating.
In which case, should sedition as a penal crime exist on the statute book, or do you believe it's outdated and that it contradicts democratic values, and that no democracy should have a law of sedition?
I mean, I think these are decisions for every country to reach after hopefully a healthy debate with all its citizens. I personally think that sedition is an anachronistic crime, and I think the trend has been, for instance, in countries like the UK, that they had it on the statute books for a long time when it was no longer used, and eventually, actually quite recently, I think it was 2009, when the UK abolished its sedition laws. Blasphemy was only abolished in 2008.